Hi, and welcome back to MCA TV's Public Awareness Weekend. I'm joined with the Western Pennsylvania chapter of the National Hemophilia Foundation. How are you guys?
Good. Thanks for having us.
We have Allison Yazer and Kim Ebsworth and Melanie Holcomb. Thank you guys for joining us today.
Thank you for having us.
So we're talking about the National Hemophilia Foundation. So Allison, can you tell me just a little bit about your guys' mission?
Absolutely. Our goal is to improve the lives of people in Western Pennsylvania who suffer from bleeding disorders. So we have about 1,150 members in the 26-county area that we serve. We go north to Erie, south to Washington, west to the Ohio border, and east to Clearfield County.
So very big area there.
Yes, we cover 26 counties.
Yeah. Now, when you talk about bleeding disorders,
yes.
What are primarily some of the bleeding disorders you guys help with?
There are two most common types of bleeding disorders, and those are hemophilia and von Willebrand disease. And I don't know how much you know about hemophilia, but hemophilia is when you are lacking one of the 13 proteins that is required to form a clot. So you scrape your knee, and these proteins go into action to stop the bleeding. So if you think of the 13 proteins as dominoes in a line, if you're missing one and they're falling, the clot stops. The two most common types are missing factor 8 or factor 9, but as I said, you can be missing any one of those 13 factors. With von Willebrand disease, you have all 13 of the proteins at normal levels, but you're lacking one of the proteins to circulate the factor 8.
Okay, so for anybody who has this disorder, you could clearly see why it would be such a difficult thing to deal with, as you don't bleed like a normal person, and there's obviously medical complications with that. So what are some of the things you guys do to help with those things?
Absolutely. Education is the most important thing that we do for our members. From newly diagnosed patients through people who are now living for the first time in generations a normal lifespan, 70s, 80s. And it's dealing with these bleeding disorders at every stage of life. Most recently, we held our Infusion Day where we teach our members and their families to self-infuse their medication, so they're not reliant on trips to the emergency room because they fell and were bleeding into a joint.
And Melanie, I know we spoke about this earlier, but for people at home who don't know what a clot is, how would you describe that bleeding process?
I am also a little bit new to this,
yeah.
So I use language that helps me understand a bit better too. But exactly what Allison said is right. You can't make a clot as easily as folks without this disorder. So it's not that you are going to be bleeding more than other folks. It's just that you're going to not be able to stop. So, and that is from what she said, scrape your knee, to internally, to if you have to have a medical procedure. All those things have to be taken into account. And the thing that was most interesting to me when I was learning about it is you need to take your factor, it's called a clotting factor, to help you clot. Sometimes 2-3 times a week, sometimes if you're lucky a couple of times, like once every couple of weeks, at the outside. And it is an ongoing daily thing that you deal with. And I think for folks like Kim, whose family is affected by this, I would be tempted to wrap my children in bubble wrap, and for her to have done such a great job with her family and having them out there and just being active, normal kids is a wonderful thing.
Yeah, and I think you said it best, that you don't bleed more, you just bleed longer.
Correct. You're not going to die of a paper cut. It's not going to be spurting blood all over the place.
Right.
It just won't bleed. It won't stop bleeding.
Right. So Kim, you're a nurse, is that correct?
I'm a registered nurse, yes.
Well, thank you for doing that. But you also have a family tie with this disorder and the hemophilia in general.
I have type 1 von Willebrand. I have 5 children that have type 1 von Willebrand. We inherited that from my father, who just recently passed away, and he had von Willebrand. I was not diagnosed until I was 35 years old. And I had 3 children. So in hindsight, the symptoms and problems that I had after having my first 3 children and during my high school years and my early 20s, a lot of questions have been answered after getting the diagnosis. And even after getting the diagnosis, my life has changed, as well as my children's lives are nothing like what I grew up with. And that's where the chapter comes in very handy and helping educate everybody so that we don't keep repeating history. Sometimes
Right.
repeating it isn't so great.
Right.
You know, the days of people dying in their early 20s of a bleed, you know, there's kids that, I also volunteer at Hemophilia Camp, Camp Hot to Clot, and those kids, they're learning prophylactic infusions, and some of these kids don't even really know what a bleed is. It's unbelievable. You know, even in nursing now, we're seeing people that are living into their 70s and 80s with bleeding disorders,
Wow.
and that just never happened before.
Yeah.
So with, you know, being involved in the chapter, it also allows us to give back what they give to us. Not only do they give us, you know, they give you financial assistance, education, camaraderie, friendships, friends that I would never have met from across the country, that my children would never have met, activities my daughters wouldn't be involved in, as well as the lifestyle that they're able to live.
Right.
They can participate in gym class without issue. The girls can swim. You know, some people talk it's voodoo, but you know, your menstrual cycle should be a week. Ours, my shortest was 2 weeks, and my longest was 52 days. So it was I was chronically tired, and you didn't want to go to gym class. And I think that my daughters had a much better high school experience than I did.
And I'm sure as a nurse you have an interesting perspective on that because you're in the medical field, so you have familiarity with it, and you see these improvements that are happening. So that has to be a really positive and great thing to know.
It is unbelievable. I've been involved in the community for about a little over 10 years. I sit on a consumer advisory board for people, we call it the Common Factors Board. And it's with CSL Behring, which is a company, it's a global therapeutic company. It's a leading company. And they actually, we go out there and we talk to people with bleeding disorders, and we talk to the chapter staff, and we find out what does the community need to make their lives better. Not only with medications, but in life, you know, like they care. They're trying to make things simpler for us. Little things like peel off labels from your medication bottles, so you don't have to, you know, keep cutting out all the little package inserts. Some of the kids had to live through, you'd have a pile this high and say, I'll write that later. Well, now some of the kids can scan it with their smartphones, or they can just peel it off, stick it, and send it. So it's really been, it's been a great ride.
Yeah, and with majority of disorders, the medical costs can be huge for some of these things. And your chapter, the Western Pennsylvania chapter of the Hemophilia Foundation, you guys do a great job of helping fight some of those costs for families. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Absolutely. Hemophilia and von Willebrand disease are two of the most expensive lifelong diseases. The average cost of treatment for an adult male who's on prophylaxis, which means they take the medication to prevent bleeds, is about $300,000 a year. We do have members whose medications cost about $20,000 a week. It's very, very difficult to isolate these proteins, and it's very expensive to make them. So we do provide financial assistance to our members. In terms of co-pays, we do help with transportation for members to get to the treatment center. There's one treatment center in our 26-county area.
Wow.
And we're very lucky that it's here in Pittsburgh, and it is a world-class center. But it's very hard for people from Erie to get down there. And we have some people who are down there 2 to 3 times a week to receive their infusions. So we provide transportation assistance. We also provide medical ID bracelets and jewelry, so that if, God forbid, a member is in an accident and can't speak for themselves, first responders know to look for medical jewelry.
Right.
So they know that this person has a bleeding disorder.
Wow. So I mean, you can clearly see where things start adding up, and you know, fighting against some of those things. So Kim, I know your family. You said you have five children.
5 children. I have
Wow.
3 girls and 2 boys.
That's awesome. So 5 children, and the disorders run in families, correct?
Yes, they're hereditary.
So what is a day in the life like living
I live the day in the life of type 1 von Willebrand, and I have 5 children that have the same protein deficiency. However, they all bleed completely different. You know, I have 2 children that tend to have, that when they were younger, it's gotten a little bit better now that they've gotten older. Joint issues, with sports and things like that.
Yeah.
2 of my daughters, chronic, really bad bloody noses. One of my daughters, really bad periods. Just, it's all over the board. My son Magnus, when he, decided that ripboarding was a good idea for a child with a bleeding disorder, came home and he had an elbow bleed. So some lessons, hard lessons learned, but I also don't shelter the kids. I really encourage them. You have to stay active. You have to keep your joints limber. You have to do your part of it, not just, I can just take that medicine.
Yeah.
Because, there's other things that factor into it, not just your von Willebrands. You never know.
Yeah. And I think that's, that's a great thing, especially for anybody listening at home who has children that may have one of these disorders. Like, it is important to live your life and not, it seems like your kids are out there being active. And
they're very active. It's became difficult when they get close to their teenage years to make them realize that they do have a disorder. When you don't want to go completely to one end of the spectrum and shelter them, but you can't just let it go either, because they have to understand that they are different. They do have a special need, and that they have to take it seriously. Just because they're not having symptoms at that time does not mean that they're not having spontaneous bleeding. But if they're in a car accident, even without a bleeding disorder, that's a really bad thing.
Yeah.
Yeah. So add a bleeding disorder in there, and that can make for a whole different, problem, and a lifelong problem. Blood should not be inside anybody's joint anywhere on the body, and you have any small amount of blood in there, you're going to have difficulties. And as you get older, those difficulties are going to become more and more prominent.
Yeah.
Absolutely. We do have older members who have fused joints, because it's much more comfortable if the joint just doesn't move once it has been eroded by repeated bleeds. So what we're trying to do is run programs where our older members talk to our younger members about the importance of maintaining their care and their prophylaxis programs, and so they can say, look at me, I can't run, my ankle doesn't move, but if you stay on your regimen and continue your prophylaxis, you'll be fine.
Try to teach the kids that, okay, probably even without a bleeding disorder, Magnus wouldn't be allowed to play football anyways. However, because I'm a nurse. But, there's other things, other jobs in the NFL. Someone gets assigned the paychecks.
Yeah.
I think they have a lot more money than a lot of the other people in the,
It's true.
So somebody has to coach, somebody has to sign the paychecks. There's all different, someone has to get the water for the players, and that's actually very important.
Yeah.
Hydration.
That's true.
So we have to teach them that just because you might not be the, quarterback of an NFL team, because then everyone wants to kill you, that you can be something else and still be just as important in any sport.
And so let's backtrack a little bit to medications and some of the medical stuff. What is the primary way that people treat the disorders?
For hemophilia, there, most of the guys and girls, I should say, that there are women with hemophilia.
Yeah.
Okay.
So is it predominantly men then?
It's predominantly men. It's passed from father to daughter. It is sex-linked, and then
The daughter would pass it on.
The daughter would pass it on to the son, and then it would just keep, it could keep going.
Yeah.
You don't know whether you pass that gene or not.
Right. Is it now? Is that a common thing? Is that like a dominant gene in the blood, or?
Hemophilia is linked to the X chromosome.
Correct.
So it's passed. If a father has hemophilia, his daughter will be a carrier. If a father, so the daughter can pass it on to a son. There's a 50% chance that a woman who is a carrier will pass it on to a son. And there's also a 50% chance that the daughter will be a carrier.
Right.
So there's been a trend recently where women used to be referred to as symptomatic carriers, because there was a perception that women didn't get hemophilia, and that's just not the case. If you are a symptomatic carrier, you are a woman with hemophilia. And the way hemophilia is treated is by self-infusing, meaning sticking a needle in your arm and injecting replacement clotting factor.
Oh, wow.
with von Willebrand, it's passed on. It's non-sex linked, so it's, mom or dad could pass it. Mom or dad could not pass it. So both parents could carry one of the genes, and they may have 4 children, and 2 of them get one of the genes, 2 of them do not.
Yeah.
All 5 of my children got the gene, so I guess they hit the lottery. The symptoms, they vary. Obviously, sometimes the girls seem to have more issues than boys. Once the kids get older and they're not jumping off of the highest thing they can find, issues tend to drop a little when they are able to think for themselves.
Right.
But with von Willebrand treatment, we can also replace factor. I do that myself. We can use, there's a nasal spray that you can use. It's called Stimate, and what that does is it helps you release any factor you might have stored in your cells in the blood, and that works for people with type 1 general. It can get really complicated, but if you don't have any to release, it doesn't do you any good to keep squirting that.
Right.
And that's very expensive. For 24 little squirts, it's about $800.
Wow.
Yeah. And for the factor, it can go anywhere. I was explaining the explanation of benefits for one of my daughters is well over $150,000 a year. And that's interesting. It's challenging because insurance is changing. There's also some other treatments. It's called antifibrinolytics. That's a big word.
Yeah.
And what that does is it means anti, so it stops. Fibrin, which is the clot. Lytic means to lyse or to cut down. So you take that medicine and it stops the clot from breaking away, which is the normal process in the body. Your body takes it away after it's healed. Well, we take that so that it doesn't do that because we're already not clotting.
Right.
So that's another way.
Once you have a clot, you want to keep it.
Exactly. We get a clot in place, we want to keep it there for a while.
Yeah. So that's, obviously it's just, there's so much involved with it. And for some people at home who hear the word factor, me personally, I was like, oh, what is this factor thing? So could you describe that a little bit? If it's
Should have brought it.
not.
I should have brought a sample. It comes in a vial usually, and it's mixed with water. Some have devices where it mixes in the device. It used to come in a little vial, and you would have to inject the saline and mix it yourself and then suck it out. It looks like a tiny bit of white powder. And you wouldn't know.
Because I've traveled with it, and it's interesting because another thing the chapter and our treatment center do for us is give us travel letters.
Yeah.
Because when you travel, you're getting onto an airplane with a vial of clear liquid and a vial of white powder.
And needles.
Right. Yeah.
And you expect them not to ask you why.
Yes.
So ultimately you need this, and I would stress the importance of making sure it's in the correct language for where you're traveling. Because
Yes.
when I did travel to Mexico, they looked at me and I had a really great letter. Dr. Ragney said I needed this and it couldn't go under the plane, and all of a sudden they're looking at me because it was in English.
Yeah.
No one could read it. So it took a couple minutes. We got it straightened out, but it's something I never thought of before.
Right. Yeah. And it's little things like that that
Seems
that,
normal to me.
Right. You don't go in expecting somebody to stop you, and then you think about it.
Exactly, especially with little kids.
Yes.
Very often they will show up in the emergency room with a child with bruises and cuts. And so a lot of our members carry letters from the treatment center stating that this child is not abused, they have a bleeding disorder.
Right.
Anyone with a child with a bleeding disorder has been taken to those separate rooms. And until Children's Hospital, once they get to know who you are, once they get to know who you are, then they still have to ask those questions, and I appreciate that because that is important. That doesn't mean children with bleeding disorders don't have other issues, but you have that letter, and it really helps explain the big bruising.
So as the Western Pennsylvania chapter for the National Hemophilia Foundation, you guys raise a lot of awareness and obviously funds and help families. What are some of the ways that people can get involved with the organization?
One of the things that I had experienced in my first little bit here is folks that have families like Kim's, it's not just that it's $300,000 per person, it's that you have a whole family because it's a hereditary disease. So that just makes an exponential burden on everyone. So this is why we raise money. We do some fantastic education events that are, I just love them, and I'm glad Kim likes them. One of the things that Kim volunteers at as well is Camp Hot to Clot, which is our summer kids camp, because if you have this disorder as a child, going to regular summer camp kind of isn't an option for you. So we have a medically supervised summer camp for kids who all are dealing with the same issues in their lives. We have education events for everyone from a first-time diagnosis. So if you have an infant or a small child and your family has just got a diagnosis of a bleeding disorder, you can come into a room with other folks who are in that same situation and talk with folks who've been living with it for a long time, and learn how your life can go. And we also have men's groups, women's groups, teens group. We're having a teen retreat, all kinds of things like that. That and financial assistance for folks is why we raise money. Volunteers help us put on our big fundraising event of the year, which is in September, and it's on September 12th in North Park, and it is a 5K walk or run, you pick. And we have teams. You can join as a team, make your own team t-shirt, raise a bunch of money for this particular chapter. Our fundraisers stay local. So when you raise money at our fundraisers, it goes to local families here in our 26 counties of Western PA.
That's great.
Yeah, we have newsletters that volunteers help us stamp and fold and mail out. So that kind of volunteer is always helpful. Handing out t-shirts and goodie bags at the fundraising events is a great volunteer opportunity. 50-50 ticket sales. Somebody's got to walk around selling the 50-50s. Those are great opportunities. Our nearest event to right now is on May 3rd, and it is our Bowl-a-thon, and it's going to be held at Paradise Island Bowl. It's from 2 to 5 on a Sunday afternoon on May 3rd, so it's a great time. We block up a side of the Paradise Island, and we have bowling teams and individuals. You can ask your friends and family to contribute to your bowling team or your bowling self, and come have free pizza and wings and do some fundraising with us.
That's great. And we're running short on time here, so thank you guys so much for joining us. Your other events are the Take a Bow Holiday Fundraiser. That's November 9th. And all of your fundraisers support local families.
Absolutely.
And all of our services are provided free of charge, which is very important for
If you have questions about diagnosis or activities or becoming involved, please contact us.
Absolutely.
Well, thank you guys so much for joining us today.
Thank you.
This has been the Western Pennsylvania chapter of the National Hemophilia Foundation. And we'll be right back with Public Awareness Weekend.
Thank you, Frank.